My name is Olivia. Centricit, a senior risk analyst. This is the story of how my husband, Ryan, drained our joint savings of $150. Ling ling ling. Forged my signature on a $500. Khungluan. And gave me 48 hours to vacate the house I paid for, all for his pregnant mistress. Lauren. He stood in my kitchen, smirking over his artisan coffee, calling my life's work a spreadsheet obsession. He thought I would crumble. He didn't know I had already started building the trap. I decided to stop crying and start calculating. The nightmare began 48 hours before that surreal encounter. It was a Tuesday morning. The world outside my window washed in the soft light of early spring. I sat at my kitchen island, a fresh cup of coffee warming my hands, fully prepared to execute a major financial move. As a risk analyst, my entire life revolves around calculating variables and making secure decisions. Month after month, I funneled my bonuses into a high-yield joint savings account. I had finally reached my target of $150. Ling ling ling. Today was the day I planned to initiate a stock buyout. I opened my laptop, typed in my credentials, and waited for the dashboard to load. I knew exactly what the numbers should look like. But when the screen refreshed, I simply stared. The numbers did not make sense. I blinked, rubbing my eyes, convinced there was a glitch in the banking software. The balance read exactly $0. No pending transactions. No halt. Just zero. A cold, heavy sensation began to spread from my chest down to my stomach. As an analyst, panic is my enemy. I forced myself to breathe and navigated immediately to the transaction history. There, it was a single outbound wire transfer for $150. Ling ling ling. Executed late the previous night. My eyes scanned the screen to find the authorization details. The transfer had been initiated and approved by my husband, Ryan. Ryan was a 5-year-old sales director. We had been married for 6 years. And while our marriage had grown distant lately, I never calculated that he would steal my savings. I picked up my phone, assuming identity theft. But before I could dial, the front door unlocked and swung open. Ryan walked into the foyer, dressed in his expensive tailored suit, holding a cup of artisan coffee. He looked completely unbothered, humming a soft tune under his breath. I spun my laptop around so the screen faced him. Ryan. What is this? I asked, my voice tight. Why is the account empty? He stopped, took a slow sip of his coffee, and looked at the screen. He did not flinch. He did not look guilty or surprised. In fact, a small, arrogant smirk played at the corner of his mouth. Oh, good. You saw it, he said casually, stepping into the kitchen and setting his keys on the counter. I meant to tell you before I left. I moved the funds. Moved the funds where I demanded, standing up from my stool. You cannot just wire $150. 000 out of our account without discussing it with me. I earned almost all of that money. Ryan, he sighed, looking at me as if I were a child. I secured a safe investment. Olivia, a safe investment. The money is in an account under Lauren's name. The name hit me like a physical blow. Lauren. She was his 9-year-old, former assistant. I had met her at several company holiday parties. She always laughed a little too loudly at his jokes and lingered just a little too long when handing him a drink. Lauren. I repeated, the reality of the situation rapidly crashing down on me. You transferred my life savings to your former assistant. Ryan crossed his arms and leaned against the granite countertop, radiating an infuriating level of confidence. Yes, Lauren, he replied smoothly. And let us be completely honest here. Olivia, We have been running on fumes for over a year. I am filing for divorce today. I already spoke with my lawyer. I stood frozen in my own kitchen. My husband had been having an affair with his younger assistant, drained my hard-earned savings to fund her life, and was now casually announcing our divorce over his morning coffee. But Ryan was not finished. He stepped closer, his expression hardening into something cold and cruel. Since we are ripping the Band-Aid off, he continued, I am going to need you to pack your things. You have exactly 48 hours to vacate this house. I stared at him in sheer disbelief. Vacate the house? I asked. My voice barely a whisper. I paid for 70% of the down payment on this property. Ryan, you cannot just kick me out of my own home. He let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Oh, but I can. He said, you see, while you were busy buried in your spreadsheets and data models, I was making actual moves in the real world. Lauren and I need this space. He grabbed his briefcase from the hall chair and paused by the front door, looking back at me with a gaze full of absolute disdain. He delivered his final blow with a practiced, arrogant delivery. You calculate risk for a living, Olivia. But you could not calculate your own husband getting bored of your spreadsheets. Have a nice life figuring out your new budget? With that, he walked out and closed the door behind him, leaving me completely alone in a house I was about to lose with absolutely no money to my name. I did not scream. I just stood there and started calculating my next major financial move. I stood there in the silence of the foyer, my mind organizing the chaos into data points. The front door handle clicked loudly. Ryan pushed the door open and stepped back inside. He had forgotten his gym bag on the bench. He picked it up. But instead of leaving, he lingled. His ego demanded an audience for his victory. You are wondering why I did it, he said in a smug tone, quoting his words. Why I chose Lauren over a woman who makes a 6-figure salary. I kept my face blank. I was not wondering anything. Ryan, I replied. I was calculating how long you will last in federal court. He scoffed. Always the cold calculating machine. That is exactly why this marriage failed. You want to know the real reason I am leaving Lauren is pregnant with my son? The words hung in the air. He wanted me to shatter right there on the floor. She knows how to be a real woman, he continued, leaning against the doorframe. She makes me feel like a husband. While you were climbing the corporate ladder and bringing your laptop to bed, she was paying attention to my needs. A man wants a family. Olivia. Not a business partner, married to a risk assessment matrix. I absorbed his cruelty without flinching. My analytical mind processed his words, extracting the relevant facts. He had an affair. He was expecting a child. And he felt justified. Congratulations on your growing family, I said, my voice sterilely. But your domestic bliss does not change the facts. I am not vacating this house. I paid for 70% of the down payment. And my name is on the deed. You can rent an apartment, but I am staying here. Ryan laughed. Oh, Olivia. He chuckled. You really think I would walk in here and drop a bomb without securing my assets first? You are not the only one who knows how to plan ahead. He pulled out a folded paper, tossing it onto the console table. Review your mail carefully, he said. The house is no longer a split asset. It is legally tied up in a new mortgage structure. I refinanced the property. I frowned, my eyes darting to the paper. You cannot refinance a house with both our names on the deed without my signature, I stated firmly. The bank requires a notary. Ryan smiled a predatory grin. Exactly, he said smoothly. Which is why you signed the loan agreements last Thursday. I have the fully executed copies in my office. The bank approved the disbursement yesterday. The air in the room felt incredibly thin. Last Thursday, I was in Chicago attending a risk management conference. I had physical plane tickets and hotel receipts proving my location. I did not sign any documents, I said slowly. The reality of the situation clicking into place. You signed them, he insisted, his voice dripping with condescension. My buddy David from the country club was the notary. It is a legally binding contract. The house is completely leveraged and I have sole right of possession. You have 48 hours to pack your bags before I call the authorities for trespassing. My analytical mind suddenly roared into overdrive. Ryan had not just drained our joint savings account, he had committed severe federally prosecutable crimes. He had forged my signature on official bank documents. He had conspired with a notary. He had committed wire fraud to move the extracted equity into a separate account. In that moment, panic and rage threatened to crash over me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab a heavy object and smash his arrogant face. But the worst thing you can do during a hostile takeover is show the enemy you are bleeding. I inhaled deeply, forcing the panic down into a tight, dark box in my mind. I needed data, not drama. I needed evidence, not emotions. I looked at Ryan, studying the confident posture of a man who firmly believed he had just outsmarted an expert. Narcissists always fail to cover their tracks. I see, I said, my tone remaining flat. Well, if the documents are signed, then I suppose there is nothing left to debate. Ryan looked slightly disappointed. He clearly wanted a fight. He wanted me crying on the floor, begging him to stay. My lack of reaction was ruining his grand finale. Just have your boxes packed by Thursday, he muttered, shifting his gym bag. My family is coming over this afternoon to start moving some of Lauren's things in. I expect you to stay out of their way. I will be sure to stay out of the way, I replied. Ryan gave me a look of disdain and walked out the door. The heavy oak slammed shut behind him. I stood alone in the foyer. I walked to the console table and picked up the paper he left behind. It was a summary of the new loan terms. 500,000 yuan. 000 of equity had been pulled from my home. I walked into my office, sat at my desk, and opened a fresh, secure folder on my encrypted hard drive. I named the file Federal Fraud Evidence. My husband thought he had buried me under debt and betrayal. He thought I was just a boring woman with a spreadsheet. But he had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of my work. I do not just evaluate risk, I dismantle it. Ryan had just become the absolute biggest liability of my life. I started typing, mapping the digital footprint of his financial crimes, preparing to obliterate his existence, every lie he told, every document he forged, and every dollar he stole would be weaponized against him. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect? I was going to strip away his arrogant smile, his stolen wealth, and his entire future. I would not shed a single tear for my dead marriage. I would build the perfect trap, lock the door, and watch him burn. I stared at the loan summary. $500. 000 of equity pulled from my home. My signature forged by Ryan's country club buddy, David, who had notarized the documents. The bank approved the disbursement the day I was in Chicago for that risk management conference. I had plane tickets, hotel receipts, proof of my location. But Ryan didn't care about proof. He cared about his victory lap. By lunchtime that same day, I had called my former brother-in-law, Jamal, to confirm the digital timestamp discrepancies. Then I sat down at my encrypted hard drive and opened the file I'd already named, Federal Fraud Evidence. Inside, I started a new folder, Forged Loan, $500K. I typed the date, the bank name, the names of everyone involved: Ryan, David, even Richard as the co-signer. I extracted the metadata from the PDF Ryan had uploaded The scanner was registered to Lauren's apartment. The notary stamp and the digital signature were hours apart. That was my first hard piece of evidence. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect? I chose my self-respect. I mapped out the entire scheme, how Ryan used David's notary license to backdate the forgery, how he routed the $500, 000, into a new account under his name, then transferred it to Lauren. I added screenshots of his bragging texts from earlier that morning. He had sent me a photo of the loan approval, thinking it would crush me. Instead, I archived it. Over the next 48 hours, I built the framework. I cross-referenced every transaction with the $150, 000 wire transfer from our joint account. I flagged the pattern: 2 separate crimes. Same perpetrator. Same victim. Ryan thought he was untouchable because he had a notary friend and a pregnant mistress. He didn't realize that forgery is a federal felony. And notarized fraud is a one-way ticket to prison. I closed the folder and smiled at the screen. My husband had handed me a loaded weapon. I just had to wait for the right moment to pull the trigger. I was still staring at the glowing screen of my laptop, the satisfied hum of my evidence folder still fresh in my mind. When the heavy thud of the front door opening echoed through the hallway, it had not even been 3 hours since Ryan left. I heard the sharp click of high heels striking the hardwood floor, accompanied by the rustling of cardboard. I closed the encrypted file, stood up, and walked out of my office. In the center of my living room stood my mother-in-law, Patricia. She was flanked by my father-in-law, Richard, and my sister-in-law, Natalie. They were carrying stacks of flattened moving boxes and rolls of packing tape. Patricia wore a designer trench coat, and her signature expression of polite disdain. Richard looked around the room as if assessing a newly acquired real estate property. Natalie immediately dropped her boxes on my custom linen sofa and began unrolling the tape with a loud, grating screech. They had not knocked. Ryan had simply given them his key, granting them full access to orchestrate my removal. "What are you doing?" I asked. Stepping into the living room, my voice was steady, perfectly modulated to reveal nothing. Patricia turned to face me. She let out a long, dramatic sigh, the kind she usually reserved for delayed flights or slow service at her country club. "We are helping you pack, Olivia," she announced as if she were performing an act of profound charity. "Ryan told us you are vacating the premises. We want to make this transition as swift and clean as possible for everyone involved. Especially for Lauren. The poor girl is dealing with enough stress right now." I watched Richard walk over to my built-in bookshelves. He began pulling down my framed photographs and tossing them carelessly into an open box. "Ryan already explained the situation to us," Richard added without looking at me. "It is a shame it had to end this way. But you have to understand our position. A man needs to secure his legacy." Natalie chimed in from the sofa, busy constructing a box. "Honestly, Olivia, you should have seen this coming. You were never home. You cared more about your corporate promotions than giving my brother a family. Lauren actually adores him. She is already picking out nursery colors for the spare room upstairs." I stood completely still. The sheer audacity of their invasion was staggering. They had walked into the home I purchased, the sanctuary I had paid for with years of long hours and extreme financial discipline, and they were attempting to physically erase my existence to make room for my husband's pregnant mistress. They expected me to break down. They wanted me to scream, to cry, to beg them to intercede with Ryan. They were feeding on the drama, eager to brand me as the hysterical, bitter ex-wife who could not handle the truth. I gave them absolutely nothing. I folded my arms and let my gaze rest on Patricia. "You are openly supporting your son stealing my life savings to fund his affair," I stated, keeping my tone strictly factual. "You are helping him enforce a fraudulent mortgage." Patricia stepped closer, her chin raised. eyes flashing with arrogant justification. She felt completely untouchable. She believed Ryan's forged documents and emptied bank accounts were a brilliant tactical maneuver rather than a stack of federal felonies. Lauren is giving us an heir. Olivia, Patricia said, her voice dropping into a harsh, venomous register. Consider that $150,000 your severance package for wasting my son's youth. Those exact words hung in the air, dripping with entitlement and malice. A severance package for wasting his youth. I looked at the three of them. I did not see family. I did not see people I had shared holidays and birthdays with for the past 6 years. I saw a group of accomplices. I saw targets. My silent stare clearly unsettled Natalie. She stopped taping the box and looked at her mother. "Why is she just standing there looking at us like that?" Natalie muttered, shifting uncomfortably under my gaze, because she knows she has lost. Patricia replied smoothly, turning her back on me to inspect a crystal vase on the mantel. She is a smart girl. She knows when the game is over. Grab those books from the corner. Richard, we need this living room cleared by tomorrow morning so the decorators can come in. I absorbed their cruelty, letting it wash over me without penetrating my defenses. My mind automatically began categorizing their words, tagging their actions as future ammunition. Patricia's verbal confirmation that she knew about the $150,000 meant she was officially an accessory after the fact. Richard physically clearing my assets while acknowledging Ryan's maneuvers tied him directly to the execution of the fraud. Natalie's eagerness to prepare the nursery made her complicit in the hostile takeover of a property leveraged through wire fraud. They were digging their own graves right in front of me, entirely blinded by their arrogance. Every box they packed, every insult they threw at me was just more rope they were handing me to hang them with. They thought I was paralyzed by shock and heartbreak. They had no idea I was simply observing my subjects, gathering qualitative data to supplement the quantitative financial destruction I was already preparing. "You can pack whatever you like," I said quietly. "I will not stop you." Patricia smiled. A cold, victorious expression. "Say, Richard," she said over her shoulder. "I told you she would eventually listen to reason. There is no point in fighting the inevitable. Just take your personal items and find a nice, quiet apartment. Olivia, it is the dignified thing to do." I turned away from them and walked slowly toward the kitchen. Let them pack the books. Let them box up the crystal vases and the framed photographs. I had already secured the only things in this house that mattered: the digital records, the financial statements, and the forged loan documents. As I entered the kitchen, the sounds of their harsh laughter and tearing packing tape echoed down the hallway. They were celebrating their hostile takeover. They were toasting to Lauren, to the new heir, to the brilliant financial moves of their golden boy Ryan. They felt utterly invincible. Have you ever watched someone destroy your home and felt oddly calm because you knew you would have the last word? I poured myself a glass of cold water and leaned against the granite island, my heart beating in a slow, controlled rhythm. I did not feel defeated. I felt dangerous. The in-laws had officially crossed the line from toxic relatives to criminal conspirators. They had chosen to ride in Ryan's sinking ship, which meant they would all go down together. When I finally ripped the hole open, I just needed to wait for the perfect moment to strike. I had just turned away from them, letting their mocking laughter fade behind me as I stepped into the kitchen. The granite island felt cold under my palms. I poured myself a glass of water, forcing my hands steady. When I heard a soft footfall behind me, it wasn't Patricia's sharp heels or Richard's heavy boots. It was lighter, deliberate. I didn't turn around. Jamal appeared at my side, his face neutral, his movements unhurried. He walked straight to the refrigerator, pulled out a glass, and turned on the faucet. The running water created a perfect acoustic shield. He didn't look at me. "Keep looking straight ahead," Olivia, he murmured, his voice barely a whisper over the splashing stream. Do not react. Just listen. My heart slammed against my ribs, but I kept my eyes fixed on the stainless steel sink. I gave him a single, imperceptible nod with a quick, practiced motion. He slid a folded slip of paper into the deep pocket of my slacks. His hand withdrew instantly, gripping his water glass. They didn't just take your savings, he said, his tone urgent and razor sharp. Ryan forged your signature to pull a $500. 000 line of credit. Call this number. Harrison is looking for you. Harrison, Lauren's husband. The man my husband's mistress had abandoned. The name clicked into place like a key turning a lock. Jamal kept his voice low, eyes scanning the hallway. I saw the initial paperwork an hour ago, when Ryan was bragging to Richard in the study, as an auditor. I know what a fraudulent loan application looks like. Ryan thinks he's untouchable because Richard co-signed it. They're burying you in debt to fund his new life. But Harrison knows. He found the trail on Lauren's end. Call him the second you're out of this house. He has a plan. Have you ever had someone hand you the key to your own liberation in a stranger's kitchen? While your tormentors laughed in the next room, I felt the paper burn against my thigh. Jamal shut off the faucet, set his glass down, and turned to leave. He paused, his dark eyes meeting mine for just a second. Take them down. Olivia, he whispered. Then he walked back into the living room, rejoining the circus as if nothing had happened. I stood alone, my fingers brushing the folded bank slip in my pocket. It wasn't just a phone number. It was a loaded weapon. My analytical mind, previously focused on survival, shifted into full offensive mode. I had a name. I had a target. And now I had an ally. I walked to the corner. And sure enough, a sleek black town car was idling at the curb. The driver didn't say a word, just opened the rear door and waited. I climbed in. 20 minutes later, we pulled up to a quiet downtown street lined with expensive storefronts. The driver led me to a heavy, unmarked brass door. No sign. No windows. Just a silent valet who opened it and gestured me inside. The Obsidian was everything Ryan's country club. Wannabe World was not. Dim mahogany paneling. Private viewing rooms. The kind of place where money doesn't talk, it whispers. I was led down a narrow hallway to a secluded booth at the very back. Harrison was already there. He sat in a heavy leather chair. A crystal decanter of scotch on the polished table. He was wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than Ryan's entire wardrobe. No flash. Just quiet. Terrifying authority. He didn't stand. He just pushed a glass toward me. Take a seat. Olivia. We have a lot of data to review. I sat. I didn't touch the scotch. I just looked at him. He didn't look like a man whose wife had left him. He looked like a man who had been waiting for this moment. Jamal gave me your number. I said. He told me about the $500. 000 line of credit. Harrison let out a short, humorless laugh. That $500,000 is pocket change. Olivia. The real crime is significantly larger. He reached beside him and tossed a thick black folder onto the table. Open it. I did. It took me less than 30 seconds as a senior risk analyst to understand what I was looking at. Offshore routing numbers. Encrypted ledger transfers. Dummy vendor invoices. The trail was meticulously highlighted. Lauren and Ryan had embezzled $2 million from a shell company. They thought they were stealing from a disorganized corporation. Harrison said, his voice flat. What they didn't know is that shell company is wholly owned by my primary trust. I'm not a mid-level logistics manager. Olivia. I'm a venture capitalist. My net worth is $700 million. I hid it all behind blind trusts. Lauren never knew who she was married to. I stared at the ledgers. The sheer audacity. You let them steal from you. I needed them to commit a federal crime I could make stick. He replied, Divorce court is messy. Federal prison is permanent. I gave them enough rope. They tied their own nooses. He leaned forward. His dark eyes locked onto mine. To close the trap completely, I need to merge our cases. The $150K Ryan stole from you. The $2 million they stole from me, I need it to look like a coordinated attack on one legal entity. The only way to do that is a paper marriage. He slid a single-page document across the table. We sign a post-nuptial agreement protecting our separate assets. We stay married just long enough for the federal indictments to drop. Then we file for an amicable annulment. In exchange for your cooperation, I'll pay you $1. $5 million as a consulting fee. I looked at the document. At the pen he placed beside it. At the man who had just handed me the weapon I'd been building for weeks. Have you ever had to gamble everything on a stranger's promise while the people who destroyed you celebrated in a mansion you paid for? I picked up the pen. I'm a risk analyst. Harrison. And my calculation says Ryan and Lauren are about to experience a catastrophic market crash. I signed my name. I spent the rest of that night locked in the hotel suite Harrison had arranged a corner room on the 42nd floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the financial district. The city lights blurred into a grid of digital veins. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. My mind was already mapping the network of crimes Ryan and Lauren had carved out of my life. I unpacked my primary workstation from a nondescript laptop bag, an encrypted hard drive, a burner phone, and a portable router configured with a static VPN tunnel. Then I pulled the black folder Harrison had given me and laid out the financial documents across the glass table. My hands moved automatically, the muscle memory of 1,000 risk audits taking over. First, I traced the $150. Zero wire transfer. Ryan had initiated it from his office IP address, no proxy. No VPN. No attempt to hide his location. The bank's internal logs showed the exact timestamp, 1147 p.m. The night before he confronted me, I cross-referenced it with the security camera footage from his office building that Harrison's legal team had subpoenaed. Sure enough, Ryan was logged into the terminal at that exact minute. Next, I dug into the $500 000 line of credit. Jamal had slipped me the bank routing slip, and I used it to access the digital mortgage documents Ryan had uploaded to the lending portal. He had scanned his forged signatures. My name, written by his own hand, and saved them as a PDF. I extracted the exchangeable image file EXIF metadata. The scanner was registered to a machine in Lauren's apartment, and the digital signature timestamp showed the file was created 3 days before I supposedly signed the notarized documents. The notary stamp, supposedly applied by Ryan's country club buddy David, was backdated by a full week. The gap was glaring enough to sink a federal case. I built a visual map on my screen. Green lines for the domestic forgery, the forged mortgage. Red lines for the international wire fraud, the $2 million routed through Cayman accounts. And yellow lines connecting the two Ryan's personal cell phone number, linked to the two-factor authentication of the shell company's banking portal. The chart looked like a perfectly symmetrical spider web, with Ryan at the center. From my own laptop, I opened a secure terminal and ran a simple script that highlighted every transaction node. The $150? 000 stolen from me. The $500? 000 equity extracted. And the $2 million embezzled from Harrison's shell company. All three streams converged into a single account used to buy the $3 million estate. The entire conspiracy was documented in one screen capture. He sat back, the hum of the router filling the silence. I had him. Every forged signature, every metadata discrepancy. every routed wire frozen in digital amber. Ryan thought he was a criminal mastermind. To me, his footprint was as subtle as a neon sign in a pitch-black room. Have you ever rebuilt yourself from the ground up? One encrypted file at a time. While the people who tore you down slept soundly in a house you paid for, I encrypted the full dossier, named it Exhibit A, and uploaded a copy to Harrison's secure server. The trap was armed. All it needed was the right trigger. The next evening, at exactly 8:00 p.m., a sharp knock echoed through my hotel suite. I opened the door to find Jamal standing in the hallway, his dark wool coat damp with the evening mist. He didn't smile. He simply stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room before he spoke. Harrison filled me in on the broad strokes. Jamal said, setting his leather briefcase on the glass dining table, but I needed to see the raw data myself. As an independent auditor, I have secondary access to the regional bank's compliance servers. I ran a shadow audit this morning under the guise of a routine review. He pulled out a thick stack of printed audit logs, the pages still warm from the printer. I leaned in, my eyes immediately catching the highlighted row, a guarantor signature line. Richard's name. The co-signer. Ryan didn't just forge your signature to extract that $500. 000 line of credit, Jamal said, his voice low and precise. The bank flagged his debt-to-income ratio because of the massive outbound wires to Lauren's shell accounts. To force the loan through, he needed a guarantor with substantial liquid assets. Richard signed. He used the family estate as collateral. I stared at the document. Patricia and Richard's sprawling home, the one they'd paraded around in social media posts, was now legally tied to Ryan's fraudulent loan. The bank had already flagged the debt in their internal system. One more trigger, and the entire estate would be seized. Have you ever watched a family you once called your own hand? You, the rope they're about to hang themselves with? Jamal closed the folder. If we proceed with the federal indictments, the bank will call in the guarantor's collateral the same day. Ryan's assets are frozen. Patricia and Richard will lose their house within hours. I looked at Harrison, then back at Jamal. I thought of Patricia's sneer when she called my savings a severance package. I thought of Richard laughing as he packed my books into boxes. We show absolutely no mercy, I said. Harrison's smile was cold. We burn it all down to the foundation. The next evening, at exactly 8:00 p.m., a sharp knock echoed through my hotel suite. I opened the door to find Jamal standing in the hallway, his dark wool coat damp with the evening mist. He didn't smile. He simply stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room before he spoke. Harrison filled me in on the broad strokes. Jamal said, setting his leather briefcase on the glass dining table, but I needed to see the raw data myself. As an independent auditor, I have secondary access to the regional bank's compliance servers. I ran a shadow audit this morning under the guise of a routine review. He pulled out a thick stack of printed audit logs, the pages still warm from the printer. I leaned in, my eyes immediately catching the highlighted row, a guarantor signature line. Richard's name. The co-signer. Ryan didn't just forge your signature to extract that $500. 000 line of credit, Jamal said, his voice low and precise. The bank flagged his debt-to-income ratio because of the massive outbound wires to Lauren's shell accounts. To force the loan through, he needed a guarantor with substantial liquid assets. Richard signed. He used the family estate as collateral. I stared at the document. Patricia and Richard's sprawling home, the one they'd paraded around in social media posts, was now legally tied to Ryan's fraudulent loan. The bank had already flagged the debt in their internal system. One more trigger, and the entire estate would be seized. Have you ever watched a family you once called your own hand, you, the rope they're about to hang themselves with? Jamal closed the folder. If we proceed with the federal indictments, The bank will call in the guarantor's collateral the same day. Ryan's assets are frozen. Patricia and Richard will lose their house within hours. I looked at Harrison, then back at Jamal. I thought of Patricia's sneer when she called my savings a severance package. I thought of Richard laughing as he packed my books into boxes. We show absolutely no mercy, I said. Harrison's smile was cold. We burn it all down to the foundation. 2 days later, I walked into the glass-walled conference room of Ryan's legal counsel. I had chosen my wardrobe deliberately, an oversized, wrinkled by cardigan. No makeup. Flat scuffed shoes. My hair was slightly unkempt. And I kept my shoulders slumped, the portrait of a woman who'd spent 48 hours sobbing on a hotel floor. Ryan was already seated at the mahogany table, flanked by his slick attorney, Davis. He wore a new navy suit and a watch I knew he'd bought with my stolen savings. He didn't stand when I entered. He just smirked, drinking in my disheveled appearance like a fine wine. Have a seat. Olivia, he said, gesturing to the hard wooden chair across from him. Let's make this quick. I have a lunch reservation with Lauren, and she hates waiting. I kept my eyes downcast, pulling the chair out slowly, letting my hands tremble as I placed them on my lap. I'm ready, I whispered, my voice hollow. Davis slid a thick stack of legal documents across the polished table. This is the quitclaim deed and the global settlement waiver, he explained, tapping a manicured finger on the top page. By signing, you relinquish all rights to the marital property and acknowledge the new mortgage structure. Clean break. I stared at the pages, pretending to be overwhelmed. In reality, my analytical mind had already locked onto page 14. Harrison's elite corporate litigators had injected a poison pill into the indemnification section, masked by altered formatting margins. The clause was a masterpiece, a cross-collateralization indemnity provision that bound any future assets Ryan or Lauren acquired to the entire forged debt. It explicitly waived corporate veil protections and bankruptcy discharge. Ryan would be legally chained to every stolen dollar for life. Are you sure this is the only way? I asked, forcing a crack into my voice. I paid the down payment. Ryan, I have nowhere to go. Ryan rolled his eyes. The house is leveraged. The money's gone. Be a rational risk analyst and cut your losses. He was so blinded by his ego that he didn't bother reading a single line. He just assumed his lawyer's draft was flawless. He never considered that a predator might be hiding in his own paperwork. Have you ever watched an enemy hand you the key to their own destruction while laughing at your supposed defeat? I let out a heavy sigh, picked up the pen, and signed my name on every dotted line, my hand shaking visibly for maximum effect. Then I pushed the stack across to Ryan. He grabbed his gold pen, rapidly scribbled his signature on every required page without glancing at the text. His face glowed with arrogant triumph. There, he said, tossing the pen down. It's done. You're officially relieved of your domestic duties. I stood up slowly, buttoning my cheap coat. As I reached the door, Ryan called out, "Have a nice life in a studio apartment. Olivia, try to find a hobby. Spreadsheets can't keep you warm at night." I turned. I dropped the broken woman act completely. My shoulders squared. My spine straightened. And I looked him dead in the eye with a cold, razor-sharp smile. I will get exactly what I deserve. I pushed the door open and walked out, leaving him alone with his forged documents and his imminent destruction. The poison pill had been swallowed. The countdown had begun. Within 48 hours of signing those fraudulent mortgage documents, Ryan executed his next disastrous move. He and Lauren took the $500, 000 extracted from my house, and combined it with the $2 million embezzled from Harrison, then dumped the entire sum into a down payment on a sprawling $3 million estate in the city's wealthiest zip code. He genuinely believed that converting stolen cash into brick and mortar would legitimize his sudden wealth. In reality, he had just painted a massive federal bullseye on his own back. And then the social media campaign began. My phone buzzed nonstop as Natalie and Patricia went to work. Patricia posted a 10-photo album of the mansion marble staircase, heated infinity pool, soaring ceilings with the caption, "So blessed to finally have a daughter-in-law who knows how to build a real home." Natalie was crueler. She uploaded daily photos of Lauren draped in designer maternity wear, holding her growing belly in the cavernous new kitchen. And she deliberately tagged my personal account in every single post. One picture showed Ryan kissing Lauren's cheek in front of a brand new imported sports car. The caption read, "My brother finally got the upgrade he deserves, leaving the dead weight behind." Richard even joined in. He posted a photo of himself holding a glass of expensive scotch on the estate's balcony, boasting about his son's unmatched business acumen. Have you ever watched your enemies hand you the evidence of their own destruction on a silver platter? I didn't reply. I didn't block them. I simply took a screenshot of every single post, the tags, the captions, in the expensive furniture and saved it directly into the federal fraud dossier. They were documenting their possession of stolen assets in real time, eagerly providing the authorities with an itemized inventory of what to seize. Every like, every comment from their country club friends was just another witness to their crime. They wanted me to break. Instead, I built their case. The very next morning, I initiated the strike. There was no dramatic confrontation, no screaming match in a crowded room. Financial execution is quiet. I walked into the sleek conference room of Harrison's primary legal counsel, flanked by 3 former federal prosecutors. Atopt patrua. M. I plugged my encrypted flash drive into a secure terminal, with a deliberate keystroke. The complete federal fraud dossier, every forged signature, every wire transfer timestamp, every piece of metadata tying Ryan and Lauren to the $2 million embezzlement and my stolen $150. 000 was transmitted directly to a highly placed contact in the FBI's white-collar crime division. Simultaneously, the file was flagged and routed to the Criminal Investigation Unit of the IRS. Have you ever felt the quiet hum of a machine you set in motion, knowing it's grinding toward justice? Over the next 48 hours, the invisible strangulation began. Sealed subpoenas landed on the desks of Ryan's mortgage lender and the bank that held the forged $500. 000 line of credit. The IRS placed a preliminary invisible lock on the shell company Lauren had registered in Delaware. Ryan remained blissfully oblivious. He was too busy picking out imported Italian marble for his new foyer to notice his primary checking account had suddenly stopped accepting external transfers. Behind closed doors, bank compliance officers flagged every transaction connected to the forged loan. Jamal, working his auditor's network, confirmed the details late that Thursday night. Richard's accounts had been tagged with federal hold codes. The net was tightening. They were standing at the bottom of the ocean, and they had no idea the water was already over their heads. The Tuesday after the federal submission, I walked into my temporary corporate suite after a long day at the office, dropped my briefcase on the console table, and sifted through the small stack of mail the concierge had brought up. Among the utility bills and corporate newsletters, one envelope stood out thick. Heavy cream cardstock, with a custom gold monogram in the upper left corner RL, intertwined in an ostentatious flourish. Ryan and Lauren. I stared at it for a long moment, my analyst brain cataloging the sheer audacity it took to track down my temporary address just to rub their victory in my face. I slid my finger under the wax seal and pulled out a meticulously designed gold-embossed invitation. You are cordially invited to the combined engagement celebration and gender reveal party of Ryan Blackwood and Lauren Hart. The venue was Oak Creek Country Club, the most exclusive club in the metro area, where Patricia spent her afternoons sipping mimosas and belittling the help. As I pulled the invitation fully out, A smaller piece of personalized stationery fluttered to the floor. I bent down, picked it up. Patricia's handwriting. Sharp. Looping letters in venomous blue ink. Thought you would like to see what a real family looks like. I didn't gasp. I didn't feel the sting I used to feel. Instead, a wave of cold clarity washed over me. Patricia couldn't help herself. She needed to twist the knife one last time. She had no idea she was handing me a front-row ticket to the detonation. I walked over to the kitchen island, laid the invitation flat, and pulled up the federal timeline Harrison and I had built. The party date Saturday. 3 weeks out. I cross-referenced it with the projected execution dates of the asset forfeiture warrants. The alignment was mathematical perfection. The FBI planned to freeze every account that same weekend. I dialed Jamal. Jamal, I need you to check the audit logs for Oak Creek Country Club. A party this scale would require a massive upfront deposit. A few seconds of typing. Then a low whistle. Richard put down the entire deposit using the secondary credit line on his house. He's sponsoring the whole thing, nearly 300 guests. I hung up. Looked at the invitation. Patricia wanted me to see their triumph. She was about to give me a front-row seat to their ruin. I pulled out my black pen, checked joyfully accept on the RSVP card, and wrote 2 guests in the number field. I selected the most expensive filet mignon option. Let Richard's fraudulent credit line absorb every dollar. I sealed the envelope, dropped it in the mailbox on the corner, and felt the calm before the storm settle into my bones. I walked over to the kitchen island, picked up the heavy cream RSVP card, and read Patricia's handwritten note one more time. Thought you would like to see what a real family looks like. I set it aside and reached for my black pen. With a steady hand, I checked the box for joyfully accept. In the guest count field, I wrote the number 2. Not one, I wasn't going alone. And under the meal preference, I circled the most expensive option, filet mignon with truffle butter. Let Richard's fraudulent credit line cover every dollar of that extravagance. I slid the card into the matching envelope, licked the flap, and pressed it shut. Then I grabbed my coat, walked down to the blue postal collection box on the corner, and dropped it inside. The envelope disappeared into the dark slot. Patricia thought she was handing me a front-row ticket to their triumph. She had no idea she was handing me the detonator. I turned and walked back into the lobby, my heels clicking on the marble floor, my mind already running the final scenario. Harrison and I had a date at the courthouse in 2 days. After that, the party would be the perfect stage for total destruction. Thursday morning arrived with a gray, overcast sky that perfectly matched the sterile nature of the task ahead. I stood in front of the massive concrete pillars of the downtown municipal courthouse, a cold breeze cutting through my tailored charcoal pantsuit. No white dress today. No lace. No bouquet. No nervous bridesmaids. 6 years ago, I stood in a sunlit garden in flowing ivory, promising forever to a man who'd eventually steal my savings and forge my signature. Today, I was wearing armor. Harrison pulled up at exactly 9:00 a.m. He stepped out of his black SUV in a bespoke dark suit. No smile. No greeting. Just a nod. We walked through the heavy double doors together, bypassing the happy couples taking selfies on the marble steps. Their joy was a foreign language I no longer spoke. At the county clerk's office, the clerk handed us a thick stack of forms. We filled them out in silence, passing the pages back and forth with clinical precision. Our post-nuptial agreement had already been executed in a private boardroom the night before, an ironclad shield protecting his trusts and my assets. The marriage certificate we were signing today wasn't about love. It was a legal lever. The moment my signature dried on the page, my stolen 150, 000, and his embezzled $2 million would become a single, unified asset under federal law. Ryan and Lauren would no longer be two separate thieves. They would be co-conspirators in a coordinated racketeering scheme. Have you ever signed your name knowing that single stroke of ink would destroy someone's entire future? We were led to a small, fluorescent-lit room where a municipal judge waited. The ceremony lasted exactly 4 minutes. Harrison and I stood side by side before the wooden podium. Rigid. Focused. When the judge asked for vows, we simply agreed to the standard legal terms. No rings. No music. No kiss. The judge stamped the certificate with a hollow thud, and it was done. Harrison slid the authenticated copies into his leather briefcase. We walked out into the cold morning air without looking back. As my phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Jamal Bank Compliance had triggered the secondary hold on Richard's collateral, I knew the trap was locked. The fall had begun. Friday evening arrived with a crackling electric tension in the air. The 48 hours since our courthouse vows had been a blur of silent, strategic maneuvering. Now, standing in the master suite of Harrison's penthouse, I was preparing for the final phase. This was not a social event. This was an execution. And an execution demands proper attire. For 6 years, I had dressed to appease the fragile egos of Ryan and his family. Conservative navy slacks, muddled by cardigans, sensible flats. Patricia used to offer backhanded compliments about how wonderfully practical my wardrobe was for a woman who spent her life hiding behind a computer monitor. Ryan preferred me invisible, fading into the background so his flashy sales director persona could command the spotlight. Tonight, I was shedding that invisibility completely. Harrison had given me an unlimited line of credit drawn from one of his private trusts. He understood the tactical necessity of an overwhelming visual presence. If we were walking into the most exclusive country club in the city to publicly humiliate my in-laws and trigger a federal trap, I needed to look like a woman who possessed the power to do it. I stepped in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror. The custom-tailored emerald green evening gown fit like a second skin-sharp asymmetrical lines. A high neckline, and a daring, sweeping silhouette that caught the light like liquid glass. I fastened a diamond tennis bracelet from Harrison's vault around my wrist. My hair, usually tied in a strict bun, fell in sleek. Dark waves across my shoulders. My makeup was flawless. Sharp. Uncompromising. I stared into my own eyes. The woman who had cried in a hotel room over a stolen savings account was completely dead. In her place stood the architect of spectacular ruin. No sadness. No heartbreak. Only a target. Only data. I stepped out of the armored SUV. The cool night air biting my cheeks. The Oak Creek Country Club glowed like a jewel cascading white orchids. A live string quartered. A swan-shaped ice sculpture surrounded by an extravagant seafood buffet. Valets scrambled. Guests in diamonds and silk murmured, their champagne flutes pausing mid-air as Harrison and I strode through the heavy oak doors. The first shock hit the ballroom like a wave. Lauren saw Harrison first. Her jaw dropped. Her face draining to a ghostly white. The glass in her hand trembled. Nearly shattering against the marble floor, Ryan turned. His smug grin freezing when he saw me. Not the broken woman in a beige cardigan, but a figure in emerald silk and diamonds. Arm in arm with the man who owned the shell company that owned his new mansion. He looked confused, then terrified. Before the silence could break, Patricia launched herself toward us, sequins glittering with fury. "What do you think you're doing here, security? Remove this woman and her companion immediately." I didn't flinch. I reached into my black clutch and pulled out a heavy matte envelope. "I RSVP'd to your invitation. Patricia." I brought a gift. I stepped around her, past the frozen security guards, and walked directly to the raised platform where the string quartet had stopped playing. I took the microphone, tapped it twice. The room fell dead silent. "Good evening, everyone. My name is Olivia. I'm here tonight to personally congratulate Ryan and Lauren as their new landlord. I looked out at the stunned faces, Ryan pale, Lauren trembling, Patricia frozen mit Lunge. I lifted the microphone and let my voice cut through the silence. You bought that $3 million estate from a blind shell company registered in Delaware. Ryan, you thought you were hiding your stolen money behind a corporate veil. But you forgot to run a basic risk assessment on the seller. That shell company is wholly owned by my new husband's primary trust. Every single dollar of your $2. $5 million down payment, the $500. 000, you forged from my name. The $2 million you embezzled from Harrison's firm, it all wired straight back into his accounts. You didn't buy a house. You signed a predatory lease disguised as a property transfer. You're squatting on land my husband owns. And your deposit is gone forever. I paused, letting the gasps ripple through the ballroom. Patricia started weeping. Lauren grabbed Ryan's arm. Ryan's face cycled through confusion. Horror. Then the dawning realization of total ruin. Have you ever watched someone realize they've been outmaneuvered in real time? You thought you outsmarted everyone. I continued, my voice steady. But you walked into a trap of your own, You used stolen money to buy a house from the man you stole from. The contract triggers a $20 million default penalty, non-dischargeable, tied to federal fraud. You owe that money for the rest of your life. I looked directly into Ryan's eyes. You told me numbers never lie. Ryan. Well, here they are. And they say you're nothing but a common thief who just handed his stolen fortune back to his victims. I stepped back from the microphone, letting the absolute devastation of my words settle over the grand ballroom. The silence was heavy, thick with the electric current of public humiliation. Ryan stood completely immobilized, his expensive designer suit suddenly looking like a cheap costume on a broken man. I handed the microphone to Harrison. He took it with a calm, deliberate motion, stepping forward to the edge of the stage. The warm golden light of the grand chandeliers cast sharp shadows across his face, highlighting the predatory angle of his jaw. He did not look at the murmuring crowd. His dark, unforgiving eyes locked directly onto his terrified wife. Lauren. Hello. Lauren, Harrison said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that commanded the absolute attention of every single person in the country club. You spent the last 6 months complaining to anyone who would listen about my lack of ambition. You told your friends I was just a mid-level manager at a boring logistics firm. You packed your bags and ran into the arms of a flashy sales director because you thought he could give you the lavish high society lifestyle I supposedly could not afford. You wanted to be a billionaire's wife. Lauren, you just never realized you already were one. Lauren physically recoiled, taking a trembling step backward. Her hands shook violently as she clutched her designer maternity dress, the fabric suddenly feeling like a heavy, suffocating shroud. I am not a mid-level manager, Harrison continued, his voice echoing flawlessly through the speakers. I am the founder and primary stakeholder of an international venture capital firm. My personal net worth exceeds $700 million. The logistics firm you thought I worked for is simply a minor subsidiary in a portfolio of 47 global companies. I hid my wealth behind blind trusts because I wanted a wife who valued me, not my bank accounts. You proved yourself entirely incapable of that simple requirement. But your infidelity is not why we are standing here tonight. We are here because of your breathtaking financial stupidity. A collective gasp rippled through the elite crowd. The wealthy investors in the room suddenly recognized the magnitude of the man on stage. They physically shifted away from Patricia and Richard, desperately trying to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of the disgraced family. Harrison turned his piercing gaze toward Ryan. You thought you pulled off the perfect crime? He said, his tone shifting into clinical corporate precision. You and Lauren used her old security clearances to access a dormant shell account. You fabricated vendor invoices and funneled $2 million through offshore routing numbers. You thought you were stealing untraceable liquid cash from a disorganized corporate entity. You were entirely wrong. Ryan swallowed hard. Sweat beading on his forehead and dripping down his neck. He tried to speak, but his vocal cords completely failed him. The arrogant salesman was dead. That account was not dormant. Harrison explained, gripping the microphone effortlessly. It was an active, highly regulated corporate lending trust. In the eyes of federal banking laws, you did not just steal $2 million. You executed an unauthorized secured corporate loan. And because you deliberately used fraudulent credentials to initiate those wire transfers, you immediately violated federal banking statutes. But that alone was not enough for me. I needed to ensure you could never walk away from this debt. I needed to trap you permanently. Harrison looked over at me, a brief flash of profound professional respect passing between us before he focused back on Ryan. That is where my brilliant wife came in. Harrison announced, Olivia knew you were too arrogant to read the fine print of your own legal victories. When you forced her to sign over the rights to your marital home, my elite team of corporate litigators inserted a highly specialized poison pill into the indemnification section of your quitclaim deed. By accepting sole ownership of the house, you unconditionally bound any and all of your current and future assets to your existing liabilities. You legally tied the forged mortgage documents directly to the embezzled corporate funds. You merged the crimes. Ryan's knees visibly buckled. He grabbed the edge of a nearby cocktail table to keep himself from collapsing onto the polished marble floor. Patricia let out a strangled, breathless cry. Finally understanding the catastrophic magnitude of her son's arrogant mistakes, by signing that contract, Harrison continued, his voice cold and unforgiving. You triggered an immediate default on the $2 million corporate loan. The penalty clauses for fraudulent extraction and breach of contract are severe. They include an aggressive compounding penalty interest rate and immediate restitution demands. You explicitly waived your right to corporate veil protections. You explicitly waived your right to a bankruptcy discharge. Harrison paused, letting the absolute horror of the situation wash over his targets. He delivered the final crushing blow with the surgical precision of a true apex predator. As of 4:00 this afternoon, Harrison stated, the total outstanding balance on your fraudulent corporate loan, including the compounded penalty interest and federal default fines, exceeds $20 million. You are personally liable for every single cent. The debt is entirely non-dischargeable. You will owe me that money until the day you die. And the federal government is going to liquidate every single asset you possess to recover it. Lauren let out a sharp, agonizing wail. The illusion of her grand wealthy future shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Her gold digger dreams evaporated entirely. She stumbled backward, her high heels catching on the hem of her expensive silk gown. She collapsed heavily into a gilded dining chair, burying her face in her hands as loud, hysterical sobs tore through her chest. She had thrown away a $700 million husband for a man who was now $20 million in debt and facing federal prison. Ryan stood frozen, his eyes wide and vacant. He looked at the massive ice sculpture, the cascading white orchids, and the hundreds of elite guests who were staring at him with absolute disgust. He had invited the entire city to witness his coronation. And instead, he had provided them with front-row seats to his total financial and legal execution. The suffocating silence of the ballroom shattered when Richard lunged forward. My former father-in-law pushed his way past the frozen waiters and the champagne pyramid, his face a violent shade of crimson, the veins in his neck bulging against his starched collar. You think you can waltz into my club and threaten my son? He bellowed, pointing a thick finger at Harrison's chest. I have the best corporate defense attorneys in this state on retainer. I will personally fund Ryan's defense. I stepped forward, my heels clicking sharply on the marble. With what money? Richard. My voice carried over the murmuring crowd. You co-signed Ryan's fraudulent $500? 000 line of credit. You pledged your entire estate as collateral. As of 4:00 this afternoon, the bank initiated seizure protocols. Your investment portfolios are frozen. Your checking accounts are locked. Your house is foreclosed. Patricia let out a piercing, hysterical scream. She clawed at Richard's lapels, shaking him violently. Tell me she's lying. Tell me we still have the house. Richard couldn't speak. He just stared at the floor, breathing shallowly. Patricia sank to the marble, sobbing. Her perfect hair and makeup ruined. The wealthy guests who had eagerly accepted her invitations now stared with cold disgust. One socialite pulled her wrap tight and announced loudly, "I refuse to be associated with federal inmates." The elite turned their backs, step by step, erasing Patricia and Richard from their world entirely. But then a new figure stepped out of the crowd. Jamal. He walked past his weeping wife, Natalie, without a glance, and stopped at the cocktail table. With a swift motion, he tossed a thick manila file onto the glass surface, the complete shadow audit. "I warned you, Ryan," Jamal said, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "Never cross an auditor." Ryan's face went gray. Before he could speak, the distant wail of sirens grew into a deafening scream. Red and blue lights flooded the ballroom windows. The heavy oak doors burst open and a team of FBI agents in dark windbreakers stormed in, moving with synchronized precision. The lead agent, a tall woman, walked straight to Ryan and Lauren. "Ryan Blackwood. Lauren Blackwood. You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and grand larceny." She pulled out a folded warrant. Agents' hands grabbed Ryan's shoulders, spinning him around. The sharp click of handcuffs snapped shut. Lauren screamed, thrashing, tangling her gown in a catering table. Crystal crashed to the floor. The agent recited Miranda rights in a cold LeBlanc's mechanical rhythm as they paraded the couple through the center of the floral arches, past the frozen elite, and out the front doors into the flashing lights. Ryan was weeping. Lauren was cursing him. Their humiliation was complete. 6 months later, the dust settled. Ryan is serving an 8-year federal sentence, his arrogant sales persona useless behind bars. Lauren took a plea deal. She now works a minimum wage retail job. Her gold digger dreams crushed by federal probation. Patricia and Richard lost their mansion to foreclosure. They live in a cramped 2-bedroom rental, bankrupt in every sense socially, financially, and morally. My marriage to Harrison ended as clinically as it began, with an annulment and a firm handshake, but he didn't let me walk away empty-handed. He transferred $5 million to my account, a consulting fee. He said, "I used it to launch my own elite risk management firm, with Jamal as my CFO. Today, I am not just a woman who analyzes spreadsheets. I am independent, wealthy, and completely in control of my own future." The most expensive lesson a trader can learn is that you never show your cards until the game is over. Have you ever smiled while watching your enemies walk blindly into their own destruction? Share your story in the comments below. If this journey of reclaiming power resonated with you, hit like and subscribe for more stories of ultimate justice. Thank you for watching. And remember, never underestimate the quiet ones.